Rio was a sad, pathetic, ugly loser who had no friends because he spent all of his money singing on idols and lived a depressing, worthless life until one day his parents died in a terrible plane crash, leaving him all alone to care for his little brother Kataro. The two were eventually adopted by the chairwoman of a local school, where Kataro worked as a babysitter to a group of pesky kids with hot mill moms. Excited that they would finally get a new family, Rio and Kataro went over to the school the next morning with the intention of making a good impression. However, they were met with a look of disapproval from the chairwoman, as she was angry at them for coming late. She immediately began quizzing Rio on his skills as a big brother, and told him that his payment for living rent-free with her, Rio, would have to become the new babysitter in charge of the school's daycare facility. He was shocked by this statement, because he hoped he could return to his old ways, but he eventually warned idea, even telling Siwa that he would be the best babysitter to all the kids, making the lame secretary cry, who wiped his face with a napkin before leaving Rio to his daycare duties. The kids had no idea that the daycare was getting a new employee, and they were scared when Rio stepped in to introduce himself, so they gathered around their babysitter Yuzeta, who was busy slacking off near the shelf. One of the kids, Takar, pulled hard on the babysitter's ear, which woke him up from and he almost cursed at the little devil before getting up to give Rio and Ciro a proper welcome. Yuzeta told the kids to introduce themselves as well, and they did a little dance while doing so. But when it was time for Ciro to introduce himself, he didn't give back the same energy, and Taka immediately told the kids to attack him for being a lifeless troll. However, Rio stepped in to protect his brother by letting the kids beat him up instead, and after seeing that they were all too wild for him to play with, Kataro walked away to the bookshelf to grab a storybook. USA noticed that Kataro was feeling lonely after losing his brother to the daycare rascals, so he offered to read his storybook out to him, but Ciro declined because he learned from Andrew Tate to never let his weaknesses show. USA's shift came to an end, and he gave Ri some final instructions before leaving him alone to handle the madhouse while he went off to meet his girlfriend at the movies. Kieran, the only girl in the group, told Rio to join in on her imaginary lunch, but just as she was about to convince him to play along, the twins, Takuma and Kazuma, ran through the entire food on the floor, making her boil inside with anger. Kazumo, the crybaby in the group, tripped and fell on his face while chasing his twin brother, and he was about to cry out a river like Justin Timberlake when Rio and Takuma came over to console him. But then the youngest in the group, Midori, began cry, and he went over to cuddle her while struggling with the tup. Kataro continued to read his storybook while secretly observing how the other kids were having fun with his brother, and when Rio asked if he was doing okay, he lied and said yes, so he could maintain his top G status. At night time, the moms came over to pick their kids, and Rio used this as an opportunity to introduce himself as a versatile caregiver with experience in pampering not just kids, but their beautiful mills as well. What did he say? They all smiled, telling him to see them at their offices sometime, because his mom was busy grading test scripts. Takar's brother Hato came over to pick him up instead, and when Taka tried throwing a tantrum to remain with Rio at the daycare, Hayato gave him a hard whack on the head, which brought him back to his senses. Told Hayato to avoid being violent with Taka, but Hayato advised him to mind his own business, as his little brother Ciro was looking very lonely. The corner of the room, Rio took his advice and went over to talk with Kataro, but just as he was about to make it up to him for having fun with the others, Kataro fell onto his lap, his face burning with fever. Rio immediately rushed outside, where he met Hayato, who escorted him to the nearest child hospital after dropping Taka off with their mom. And on the way there, Rio kept on blaming himself for not paying attention to his brother while they were at the daycare. At the hospital, the doctor informed Rio that Ciro's fever was a minor problem that would resolve itself in the morning, and he went outside to let his parents know about the situation on the phone. But when he remembered that they had died in the plane crash, he broke down in tears. At that moment, the chairwoman appeared and consoled him, telling him that it was all right to cry sometimes rather than bottling up his feelings to seem strong. She explained to him that she also lost her only son and the plane crash that killed his parents, and promised to always look after him and his little brother for as long as they remained with her. Rio was deeply moved by those words, so he went back inside to find Kataro, who had been crying since he woke up, and upon bringing him closer, they let out all the pent-up tears. Since the death of their parents the following morning, the grumpy old chairwoman burst into Rio's room and yelled at him for being lazy and wasting her time, so she instructed him to get off his bed and prepare for school, also adding that he would be spending in his entire break time at the daycare to get back at her. Ciro tugged on her hair and called her a shaggy old woman, so she threatened to give him a similar hairstyle. However, before leaving she showed Rio his new uniform, although he initially wanted to manage an old pair, and he was shocked that she would go through the trouble of getting him a new one when he was just months away from finishing middle school after dropping his baby brother. Daycare Rio walked to class and noticed that his schoolmates kept giggling as he walked past them until he met Hayato, who told him that it was because the kids had been following him. Surprised, Rio asked them why they weren't in the daycare, and they said that Kataro wanted to follow him, so they all backed him up in that instant. They began to embarrass him and started asking him to play with them, so Hayato threatened them with his iron fist. His younger brother called him a poopy head, after which he ran in tears until he accidentally bumped into a mean-looking girl. Rio apologized, but the fierce lady wasn't having it, so she questioned why he had brought his daycare battalion to disturb the peace of their school. However, this only scared the children, and they ran towards Rio. Apparently, the mean girl was an armada of Class A, who was the most brilliant girl in the school, but her actions made people gossip about her mean attitude, saying that she was way too hard on Rio. Meanwhile, guys got to the daycare. They met Yuzuya snoring away as usual, so Hayato jerked him from dreamland with a hard knock. On the other hand, the kids were still sad, so Rio was trying to cheer them up. But when an armada came in to drop off Aka's lunch, they ran away in fear as they clung tightly to their savior. Seeing this, USA faked to cry about a non-existent stomach ache and told Hayato to take him to the nurse's office. Then he immediately asked Armada to assist Rio in watching over the kids, putting her in an awkward situation. Noticing this, Rio told her that she was free to leave because he could handle the kids alone, but she said she was going to help since USA had asked her to. She then offered to hold the baby and unfortunately became frantic, so the baby was frightened and started crying, and this caused the other kids to gang up against her and retaliate by threatening to give her the biggest beating of her life. However, as soon as she shot them a very dark and scary look, they all scurried away in fear, backing down instantly. But this only upset her, and her eyes began to swell up with tears when Rio noticed it. He told the kids to apologize for their bad behavior, but she told him that she didn't want a forced apology from the spoiled brats, and Rio smiled, saying they weren't brats. This made Anada angry even more, and she threw toys at him, saying that the kids really liked him while she was hated by everyone because she was only good at studying and nothing else at that point. She had burst into tears, so the cute little ones moved towards her, apologizing for their behavior towards her, and they started crying too, so she embraced them as they all continued their tearful gathering until they fell asleep in a warm cuddle. Later, Kataro was upset because Taka mocked him for wearing a shirt with a tiger's picture, even though he had never actually seen one. Hayato, in his usual habit, didn't hesitate to reset his baby brother's head with his iron fist, and it led Taka to assume that his elder brother hated him, worsening the situation. Hayato coldly said that he didn't particularly like or hate him. Then Taka burst in tears, concluding that he hated him, so he continued to throw a fit, and his brother took him away. Rio, on the other hand, planned to take Zero to the zoo later that weekend, but the other children wanted to share in the fun and used to seize the opportunity to make some cash for himself at home. Rio sought the old lady's permission to take the kids on the zoo trip, telling her that he had spoken to their mothers, and so she agreed to it, but refused to pay the lazy USA for working during weekend hours. She also declined Rio's invitation to the zoo, calling it a stinky place, and later on Siwa gave Rio their lunch pack along with some money from the chairwoman at the zoo. Yuzeta had found another way to cash out, and after rejecting the money that he was offered, he told Rio that he would sell pictures of the kids to their respective fathers. Meanwhile, Hayato dropped Taka off because he had to go for baseball practice, so they started visiting the animals, from cute elephants to scary tigers, while the money-hungry USA captured all the memories. Later, they had lunch together, and afterwards Kataro pointed to some sheep, calling them Shaggy because they reminded him of the old lady's hairstyle. Seeing a bird, Taka said his name translated into the name of that bird, but when Rio pointed at a falcon, which was the meaning of Kato's name, Taka aggressively denied ever having an older brother. Afterwards, they visited a toy shop, and the children's eyes were wandering over everything they saw. So when Zero saw a toy that looked like his shaggy old woman, he wanted one, and Rio went to pay for the toy, leaving Taka in USA's care. Trying to cheer Taka up, Yuzuya offered to get him a souvenir for his older brother, but the stubborn kid refused one. However, while Yuzuya wasn't looking, the child saw someone that looked like his older brother and started running after him, so Rio returned to find that Taka was missing, and they went searching for him. Meanwhile, Taka found out that the man he saw wasn't his brother, but he continued running until he stumbled and started crying out for his older brother. Just then big brother Hayato came to the rescue and held him as he cried. But it was a brief moment of cuddling, after which Hayato's iron fist made Taka apologize for causing them trouble later. Everyone said goodbye and Ryo commended Hayato for showing up because Tako was lonely in his absence, but he said that he only came because he had received a beating from them. For leaving him behind, Tako warmly told his older brother that he loved him, and he, in his cold nature, replied saying that he didn't hate him either, while letting Ryo know that Kataro had so much love for him at school. The girls discussed which guys to give their Valentine's Day presents to, asking Yuki if she had anyone special in mind. But she quickly said she didn't. Meanwhile, the boys also discussed whether they would receive presents, and they were fortunate to witness Hayato being handed present from a girl, but he outright refused it, which made the others upset. While they continued discussing the Valentine's Day gifts, Ryo wondered how the strict Inam would react if she found out that students were breaking the rule of not giving presents at the same time. Some girls in an Amada's class gave gifts to Yagi, but then she suddenly got angry and told them to think about their actions, and they started complaining that she was being cold and unfriendly. However, Yagi stepped in and calmed them down, assuring them that they could give him the presents later outside school hours, and told Inada that he was interested in joining the babysitter club because he loves taking care of children. But when he asked her how to join, she snapped and told him that she didn't know anything about it. She then left and started thinking that she was cursed and everyone would hate her, and because of this, she was scared to join the babysitters club, fearing that the children would also dislike her. But despite her fear, she wiped away her tears and decided to stay strong by focusing only on her studies. Yagi met Ryo in the daycare room and told him that he wanted to become a babysitter, but Ryo became confused and went to call the others.